Thank you, Greg, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I hope everybody is doing well, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you all. My name is Pavan Thimmaiah. My pronouns are he, his, and him. I'm currently on the land of the Munsee Lenape, now known as Manhattan. I am a non-disabled brown person of Indian heritage. I am wearing a black hoodie, I am sitting in my office with a background of my door and a white wall. So I'm here to talk about de-escalation. And before we begin, I just want to caution that de-escalation is very much situation specific. And so be mindful of that when applying any sort of techniques. Um, Also, I recommend anybody practicing or taking de-escalation seriously to follow up and implement training, additional training, and take on additional resources in order to really um, be able to deal with all situations or most situations that would come your way. Um, okay, let me begin. So the best way to de-escalate or to avoid a situation is to simply prevent it, to never have it happen in the first place. And really, I would stress that that has been, in our experience, the most useful tool. Now, we've been open here at the studio offering in-person services, classes, and rehearsal space since July 20th. And in that time, the prevention element of it has been key to keeping our doors open, but keeping everybody safe. The first thing I would say is create a culture of caring. You are caretakers now, as much as you are dancers or choreographers or directors. You have to emphasize connections between you, your customers, and anyone that walks in your door. And you're the aura of the place, feel like everybody there is there to care for each other. It sounds sort of idealistic, maybe, but it is necessary. And it is something that takes time to develop. It is a culture that you're creating, one of understanding and compassion. So I would start with that before you do anything else. Um, After that, really, you want to create a system that deters confrontation. And I mean that by the stuff that you post or communicate, how you set up your physical location. For example, people cannot simply walk into the second floor. They have to use this intercom. They have to introduce themselves. There's a pre-screening. There's this established process that everybody follows. And that allows us to avoid confrontations before they can even begin. For example, someone walking in off the street with the misunderstanding of how they can enter or how they can use the premises during COVID times. Or someone who might be COVID positive, or someone who is an inspector that might believe they can simply walk in when they want to walk in. If you create a system that shows it's not so easy to get in, that automatically deters them from maybe pursuing it because they can see that you're doing things to deter people from walking into the space, or maybe they just don't want to come up that day because they don't want to go through the process of finding a building manager and all of that. So you never know, but it does help, and I find that has helped the most in this time. Um, when you are going forward with this, educate yourself with all of the issues, right? That means things that are going on in the world, COVID, social justice, the laws. What are the things that you need to know to open a space or to rehearse or to dance or whatever it may be? There are a lot more going on than you might see on the surface, and you need to really take time to educate yourself on those issues. Specifically in regards to COVID-19, what we are going through is a traumatic experience that we have all shared in for over a year's time. We've not come to terms with that. We have not reckoned that yet. We have not dealt with the trauma in the way that we should have. So what I would suggest is be mindful of that. People are coming into you already upset, already with predisposed issues and challenges in their life, and they may not be They may lash out or you might feel like they're confrontational, but you are generally not the reason why. It's more because we are in a situation where we just have not dealt with the reckoning that this era, this last year and a half has given us. Also be mindful that in terms, again, specifically of COVID, it does alter your body chemistry. So there are links to mental health issues associated with that. The mental health, mood disorders in particular, I would familiarize yourself with that. And I say that because just right before this call, I had someone I was speaking with, and it started as a conversation about attending the studio and attending a class. An hour later, it turned into a conversation about their mental health. They wanted to harm themselves. They said, I did not want to live, of that nature. It was very distressing of a call, but they were upset when they called. A little thing about not being able to get into a waitlisted class set off an entire conversation about why they were upset, and it just kept going. And you listen to them, you go forward with it. But what I would early on is be prepared, right? Be very prepared for these types of situations. So, in that note, when you're prepared, take a deep breath before you talk to people and say, I can do this. I'm ready. Every time someone calls, I go, and then I'm like, okay, here we go. But obviously, most of the time, it's nothing serious, but it does help you prepare because you will have elevated levels of adrenaline and emotions, and you need to be prepared for that. Okay? Go in situation understanding it's about the situation. It's not about the relationship or the person that's in front of you or the relationship you have with them. Stay on topic about the situation. If the situation is an inspection, for example, it's about COVID safety. It's not about them trying to shut you down. If the situation is about wearing a mask, again, it's about safety. So you want to stay on the situation and avoid you and what you versus me sort of thing. Then it becomes contentious. That's not good. Understand the issues and set a goal and make it a goal oriented conversation. So if my situation is I'm getting an inspection, okay, it's about COVID safety. The goal is to find safe measures. So make the goal shareable so that the objective is the goal and not winning the argument. Don't go into it thinking that it's about winning an argument. Be mindful that it is a finite situation. It is going to end. So as bad as it feels in the moment, it will end. All right? And practice this technique constantly because the engagement, the adrenaline you feel will be real. And you have to be prepared for that because that will throw you off of what would normally be sort of your logical process of thinking. And the last thing I will say before I pause for a moment for any questions is that you have to have certain contingencies in place. If a situation escalates past your area of expertise, who do you go to? Where do you go? Do you have a supervisor? What's the process in place? Do you call a health professional? Do you call even the police? You might have to figure out where to go if the situation is over your training, past your purview. Communication skills are an absolute must. Communication skills if you're going to communicate and convey things in a way that do not escalate a situation. So I'll pause for any questions before I go into any specifics in terms of a specific situation. Greg, let me know. Otherwise,
Yes. Hi, Pavan. Greg speaking, white Latinx man, glasses, black t-shirt with white lettering that proudly says I am in New Yorker for dance, moderator from Dance NYC today. It looks like we don't have any questions in the chat, so keep going, but I'll let you know when they do come through.
great. Thank you. In any de-escalation situation, There's really three basic premises or steps. First is the threat risk assessment. So you have to assess essentially the threat and what the risk is to you, to people around you, to your place. The second is what your goals and actions you will take. This is to basically to determine what actions are necessary to reach that goal. And then the third part is you always review and assess. This is essentially being adaptable, because you'll have to go through it. You might have come into it with one goal and one assessment, and through the conversation or through the situation, you may come up that you have to adapt and reassess and reevaluate and start all over again in terms of how you approach. So that is the general premise of most de-escalation. The first thing in any sort of escalation situation is be empathetic. Don't judge. Can't stress this enough, because everybody comes in with their own ideas and their own feelings about how a situation or how a place should be run or whatever it might be. Respect a person's feelings. Their feelings are very real. The reality of the feelings is maybe stronger than the reality of the facts. You have to get to a point where you reach out to them and say, okay, I understand your feelings. Those feelings are maybe justified, and respect those feelings. No matter what you do, respect those feelings. Whatever's going on in that time is important to them, and respect that. Once you can get to them on a point where they feel like you understand their feelings or respect it, you can come down to a place where you can have a little more of a civil conversation, or a conversation about the situation or the facts. Respect personal space. This is very important. Your posture, position, the way you hold your hands, the way you make eye contact, and how much distance you have between you and the person you are speaking with, your mannerisms, they all create a feeling of either confidence or anxiety or somewhere in the middle. So respect the personal space of somebody else, and respect how you move in space so that they don't feel like you're infringing upon it. Same goes with how you speak or how you address them. You need to use non-threatening verbal cues, right? So don't we do this on the call all the time, but it is important not to address someone as she or him if you're not sure of how to address them, right? Do not point fingers or use accusatory language. That will not go well. Don't use facial expressions that feel threatening or accusatory, or body language. Stay even toned. Don't have any tone that would imply one way or the other. Speak slowly and speak confidently, and try not to second guess yourself. Just take your time and go forward. This is an obvious one. Keep emotions in check. Again, with the inspections, it's very easy to be like, why, keep emotions in check and address the facts at hand, right? So if someone is saying, if you start showing emotion or getting heated, they will get heated, because what they listen to is tone. If I say something and I yell it, they will hear the tone and respond in kind. And after a while, all you start hearing is tone, and the content of what you're saying no longer matters. So if you're dealing with someone who doesn't want to put a mask on, let's say, or doesn't want to pull the mask all the way up, you have to say it in a kind way. Hey, sorry, this situation is for us to open and for everyone to feel safe. Please put your mask on. I understand it's difficult. I understand it's anxiety, but if you need to breathe, you can go here, and this is what you can do, so on and so forth. But don't address it like they're not wearing a mask, I feel unsafe. That will exacerbate the problem. Ignore questions that are challenging, meaning that you're going to get stuff where the topic, the situation, the goal will become diverted if sometimes you take questions that are challenging and that really don't have pertinence to that moment. If they do and it's outside of your authority, you can take it up the ladder. For example, when people question our rules about COVID safety, We can just say it's a city ordinance, it's a city rule, it's a state rule. So we don't address the substance of the question because it's just a city rule and it's out of our jurisdiction. So these are things that are important. Setting limits is extremely important. And when you set limits, it's not the same thing as making it an ultimatum. You have to set limits so that people understand they have choices. That is probably the most important thing, is to create choices. So if someone says, someone the other day came in with a bandana on their face and it's not appropriate. No, I don't have a mask, but we have masks. And if they continue, if the conversation continues, say, listen, I understand it's uncomfortable, but to dance here and for us to remain open, we all made the choice to wear masks and be mindful of each other, despite whatever we believe. It will end one day, but for now, we do need to wear it, and we would respect and we would really appreciate if you would do it. But if you don't, we respect that. We'll give you your money back, and you can go home and come back when things resume normal. And you go from there. It automatically brings the temperature down. It shows that they're making the choice to leave and they're not being forced to leave, or they're making the choice to comply. That is important, right? Because you want any decision you make, it's not about authority. It's about giving choices and making them understand why they are making those choices and what the consequences of any choice they make would be. So setting limits gives you that. You don't want to punish, you want to teach. So even if you don't come to an agreement on what to do, at least you're hopefully teaching them why you do the thing that you do. Maybe at a later point they'll understand it. And remember that in setting limits, listen more, perhaps talk less. Set what the limits are and listen to what they're saying, and create a conversation. And that's important. A conversation is good. Yelling is bad. The more the conversation goes, you understand one another, and the more you feel like you're talking to each other rather than talking at each other. The one important thing that I've found really helpful is silence is your friend. Silence is your friend. If things get a little tough, take a moment, step back, allow a couple of moments for silence, and then resume the conversation or reapproach it, restart it, do what you have to do. But don't keep pushing it if you feel like you've hit an impasse. Try to take a moment and step back. Allow time to pass if you can. Allow people to come back and reassess, because when things cool down, sometimes it's like, okay, yeah, okay, I understand. Then they come back and they want to do the thing they want to do. And again, it's about the goals you set, right? If my goal is to stay open and I see an inspector, I will let them know that, hey, we have the same goals. Like, I don't, let me know how we can achieve it together. And here are the facts that we have, and here's the goal. Let's find a way to make them meet. If you have someone who wants to use certain language while they're in the space, listen, our goal here is for everybody to dance happily. So if that's going to happen, don't use this type of language. So this is sort of being goal oriented, situation specific, and mindful is really helpful in any sort of a de-escalation situation. So I'm going to pause here. If there are questions, please ask. Otherwise.
Great. Thanks so much, Pavan, for all of the great information. There was not a question, but a comment that came through in the chat that I just want to raise. It said, this is great. The specificity of a dancer with or without a mask is perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If there's any other questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. Yeah, and then you can keep going. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, at this point going forward, they're really, without having the benefit of working through it with someone in a specific situation, that you'll find things in those circumstances. So Usually at this point in a de-escalation training, you create situations, you sometimes hire actors so you can simulate the stress that happens in a situation like that. I would recommend that for anybody who wants to deal with it. I will tell you that even dealing right now, there's a lot of social justice issues, and I think you're all aware of it. Being mindful of it and understanding, for example, if you're dealing with someone from a marginalized community, they're oftentimes not as receptive to authoritarian sort of language. That's important. Another thing that just to mention this as well, when you're looking at someone, really try to read and understand their body language. If they're coming in and they're having anxious gestures and anxious looks, and that is a sign that there's something, that's a potential that there's something more going on, and you want to be mindful of that for sure. If you're running a facility, you would really want to have your team on board and mindful of all of these techniques. It really helps. It really helps. When the first week we opened, we had a lot of situations, and we learned very quickly how we needed to adapt. And it's not the same as it was before COVID-19, and then before all of the social justice issues we are currently facing. So yeah, I mean, that's basically it. If you want me to go over something more specific, Greg, in terms of the inspector versus the patron versus intra-staff or faculty, do it. Um, but let me know.
Great. This is Greg speaking. Yeah, I have a few questions about inspectors, but the time is also
Mm-hmm.
open. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. One of the questions that we had is there a checklist of any paperwork, or like what should you have prepared when an inspector is coming?
So now when the inspectors are coming in, this is something that through the Dance Studio Alliance, we've discovered from the various perspectives of all the different organizations. It does differ depending on how you open, first and foremost. So if you're opening like most studios are, which is under the gym's provision, there is first you have to schedule an inspection, an online inspection essentially. You'll have to have all of your paperwork done that you download from the New York Forward plan. You'll have to have that in a binder with your cleaning log and all of your mitigation measures and plans. You have to have the space marked out for social distancing in the studio and outside. You'll have to have sanitizers, I should say, in each room. But in terms of paperwork, you do want to have your tax information ready. That's something that when we were inspected, they were really quick to like ask if you really run the business or whatever they wanted to do. A lot of a lot of the time they come in with one goal, and then they're like, well, let me find an infraction. So their goal is an infraction, whereas your goal is to stay open. So you need to be prepared to have them find, to kind of mitigate that and then find middle ground. But yeah, you do need paperwork. You definitely need to have what's on the New York Forward website downloaded, completed completely. And you need to be ready to show them your HVAC, ventilation proof, and that all of that is certified. And you need to show that all of your mitigation, your cleaning logs, all of the sort of commonplace things now that you see at businesses.
Great, thank you very much. You were talking about scheduling the appointment. How
Mm-hmm.
long do you like? How long before I'm ready to open, or like how long does it take for an inspector like that appointment to be made?
So it varies. There's been a follow up the next day on inspection appointments. There's been follow up the next week for some facilities. So it varies quite a bit. I think right now it's pretty quick. I've heard it's within a day or two. You get a follow up on creating a virtual inspection, um, and they make you walk through each room and show them what's going on. But the follow up is relatively quick. And I would say that, also be mindful that inspectors are different. Each one is really different. Some asked for grids in the floor, some asked for just markings. So they all have different sort of criteria because, to be honest, it's not really well thought out. The whole process is not completely vetted yet. So it needs some time maybe to settle in, but there is a lot of difference between inspector to inspector. So be mindful and prepared for that. Some may have more, I had an experience where it was more, there was a more threatening language one, and then someone else came in and they were completely friendly, but they were saying the same exact thing, just in different ways. So try to sparse out the threats and just listen to the content of what they're saying. Like, you need to do this or else, or all I heard was, you need to do this. Okay, cool. Like that's how you want to approach that.
Great. This is Greg speaking. Thank you very much. Another question is, what happens if you do have a violation that does need to be corrected?
So if you do have a violation, they usually give you an amount of time to correct the violation if it's relatively minor. If the violation is not minor, and again, this is all in the subjective view of the inspector, they are within their right to issue a violation, which is why generally it's advised you don't want to be overly antagonistic with an inspector. You just want to be, yeah, okay, sure, we'll do. You try to be understanding that they're doing their job, and then once they give you a suggestion or something to do, presuming it's within reason, that you do it. We had one facility that said they're getting random inspections every week, and the inspector's like, "We'll be back." So you have a varying degree of, and then one facility got one, and that was it. They never got one ever again. So in both cases, it was like, "Oh, do this," and some people follow up and some people don't. So the worst story I heard was that they were like, they stood by the person and made them shut down. So I think they're more interested in compliance than they are in issuing violations at this point, because I think they realize it's a difficult position to be in. But yeah.
Great, thank you. This is Greg speaking again. Is so with any of the violations, is there any sort of fine that could be attached to it, or is it really, like you're saying, focused on compliance now?
No, everything the DOB, I won't say everything, but a lot of what the DOB does has a backing of fines into it, because that's the consequence. So I've heard of fines that are in the thousands for violations, and they can certainly force closure of your business. I think most of us have landlords, right? And if the landlord is notified, it sort of puts you in a bad spot to begin with. So there are violations and there are fines for those violations for sure. The amounts I'm not 100% familiar with. I'm sure they vary. But to me, it's more if the landlord gets wind of it, they're going to do what's best for risk. They're going to be also being like, this is too much risk. Why are you open? Why are you doing that? That sort of thing too.
Great. This is Greg speaking. So if if you are shut down by an inspector, when are you allowed to reopen, or do you know anything about that process?
Um, I'm trying to think if there was no one in the DSA that I'm aware of was shut down and then said to reopen. I think if you're shut down, it's usually if you're in a gross violation. From people I know in other industries like restaurants, it's if you're in gross violation of an ordinance, like you overcrowd or you're just not masking, you have no mitigation. Um, they usually, what from my understanding, is that they give you 3 days to a week to make the fix on a suggestion, and then they follow up. And if you're unable to do it, and then after that time, they may ask you to shut down until you can appear and show what you're doing. But in terms of dance facilities, I haven't actually seen anyone that's been told to shut down, do a thing, and then reopen. I have seen that ones that were just told to shut down. But now that studios are allowed to open and the climate is a lot different, like they're not so eager to just shut people down. They realize it's contentious, so they're trying to avoid it.
This is Greg speaking. Thank you. It's really good to hear that it's not as contentious anymore and that there's, more support for opening. Earlier, you were talking about the virtual versus like an in-person inspection. If you can talk about the differences between virtual or in-person and kind of what to expect or what that process looks like.
So I have had the in-person, and I know people that have had the in-person, and that is, you just have to be prepared to have everything on the wall, all your paperwork, all your documentation, as well as in a binder, and have everything in order. That's just them looking around. Oftentimes they're not really surveying the entire space. They sort of come in, see what you're doing, see how many people are there, and if they feel like it's a risk, they leave. The last one I got, they were like, are you?" It seemed like they wanted to see if we were a club because they saw dancing and lights through the window, and they're like, "Is this how many people? What kind of sound system you have?" They're asking questions like that, which means to think that they're trying to see if we're doing like some sort of secret club, dance club operation. Um, but the virtual inspection is a little more, it's a little different. They ask you to go to each room, show what you're doing, show the HVAC system. They ask you to basically take your computer around and show them everything they want to see. And mainly the ventilation, they want to see how many windows there are, how you're ventilating the rooms. The focus now is actually more consistent with health guidance in the sense that it's about ventilation and distancing and things along those lines rather than like just surface area cleaning, which is still a thing, but it's not as emphasized as it was early on. I hope that answered the question.
This is Greg speaking. Yes, yeah, I think it did. Another question was if you can talk about the like getting re-inspected, like the random inspections after you've already passed and been allowed to reopen, like what that ongoing process is.
So inspections can happen if someone reports something anonymously or if they just decide to do a spot inspection. So a lot of times what'll happen is they actually keep on record if someone has put in to follow up. And follow-ups can happen anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks from the experiences that I have heard. And when they follow up, they often are looking to see if you are in compliance with for whatever reason. If you violated something, they want to see it. But when they follow up, they're not any different in their approach. They're not like, "Did you do this now?" They kind of take it the same way because it's a different inspector. It's not the same inspector. It's not the same person. So they're just told to go to a place and they give you sometimes, if it's anonymous, they'll tell you it's an anonymous complaint. But if it's a follow-up, they'll tell you, "Oh, it's a follow-up." So you kind of know you can. What I would inspectors come in, ask a lot of questions and ask good questions like, what are you looking? What are we in violation? Are you here as a follow up? Did someone make a complaint? What was the complaint? When was the complaint made? Things along those lines. And ask for identification. So what's your badge? Like things along those lines, just to keep. You want a situation to be in your ballpark, in your control. Have the conversation in your office to start. I know it sounds crazy, but it's like having a meeting in a conference room as opposed to a hallway. So any situation you have, when we have situations with customers, for example, or intra-staff, we go into an office space or a space where it's allocated to have those conversations, and then you can have them.
This is Greg speaking. Thank you. Um, you were talking about that it could be due to a complaint, like that somebody complained, or a spot inspection. Does that look any differently with the inspector, or is it just the reason that they're there?
It's just a reason.
Okay.
It doesn't look any differently because, yeah, I mean, we've had what, 4 or 5, and they're all different, so it's never looked any differently. But one would follow up to another, and there was no difference.
Great.
Yeah, and no one in the DSA that I'm aware of has said there's any difference between inspections.
This is Greg speaking. Do you have any I guess like tips or like insider, I mean, you've shared a lot already on like the what to like advice, I guess, that you would have for somebody, and then also any sort of insight on applying the de-escalation training that you just talked about to possibly like an angry inspector or something like that.
An angry inspector is not a good thing. So your first thing is to, if you get an angry inspector, I would really start the conversation. I would say this. Let me backtrack. They're human and you're a human. So if they see I had one angry inspector early on, and I brought my wife there, and I'm like, this is a family thing. I humanize. What am I supposed to do? I'm in the arts. We have no way of making money. Whatever. You humanize the situation, so their anger kind of quells down a little bit. And then you try to understand their perspective. I know you have to do your job. I know it's a difficult job, but you start by understanding why they're angry, because no one wants to be in this situation. And I think that's a common ground. That when an inspector comes in every single time, we both are like, why are we in this situation? Like the end conversation is always like, why are we here? Like, this is just ridiculous. Let's just go, whatever. You do what you got to do. I'm just going to leave. Like, that's how every inspection has ended. When we were in that situation where they were trying to shut studios down. Now it's different, obviously. But even if you have an angry inspector, that's my advice on that, for sure.
This is Greg speaking. Thanks so much for all of the information that you're sharing. Before we started doing the Q&A, you had also talked possibly about either like differences for students or for staff with the de-escalation
Yeah.
training. So I was just wondering if you could expand on both of those a little bit more.
So their situation is different because the relationship is different. Students, your staff have to be treated with a level of understanding. And if you just simply, in dance organizations in particular, organized in these sort of hierarchical ways, that, for example, it's like a sports team. There is an owner, but the player is still the best player, even if the owner is the owner. So you have to deal with situations a little differently. For customers, it's more about creating good communication procedure, and being consistent across the board. Don't make exceptions. Very consistent about how you talk to them, and be understanding, and not make it about money or anything along those lines. For staff, that's a little more about, hey, we're on the same team. We need to work together on this. I need you to be a part of this, because if you're not, all these people are not going to be able to dance. If there's a conflict, you have to take them in. You have to go him, her, or them into an office area or a space. You can have a conversation, make them feel valued, make their point of view feel like it's been listened to, and really do listen to it. And then listen to what their needs are, and be really mindful of their needs. I would suggest with staff, give them things that they may not ask for, because it shows you that you really care. Like, we give free space for our faculty to do Zoom classes or whatever, even if it's not here at the studio, because we want them to know, like, we know it's tough. You got to make your money, man. Earn what you got to earn. Like, that's how it works. So things like that automatically sort of bring down the temperature, and it sort of makes everybody feel like, oh, we're in this together, and it works out. They'll pull for you, you pull for them, and that's how it works with staff.
Great, Pavan. Thank you. No, sorry, this is Greg speaking. Thank you so much for everything that you're sharing. I don't know if you wanted to give us any last thoughts or like last tips.
My only last thought would be, again, preparedness. Get information and facts. Be prepared on a daily basis, on what's going on in the news, but what's going on in your legally when you're talking about inspections. We really researched the inspection, the New York Forward plans. We found every place where dance was listed, like literally every place, and we used it as a point of reference whenever we had a conversation. And we use precedent as conversation, because legally precedent does matter. So these things are important when you're talking about inspections. And when you're talking about people, also be prepared. Be prepared to have conversations about the facts at hand, the situation, and give everybody realistic expectations whenever you have a conversation. Remember, again, I think people are inherently looking for togetherness and a connection, but they come into a place sometimes with anger and resentment about why they are where they are. And that does happen from time to time. It's just a matter of remembering that we need that connection. Working together is better than working, against each other.
Great. This is Greg speaking. Thank you again so much, Pavan. Thank you for all of the information that you shared. Also, just I think for your candor and your candidness about speaking about everything. I'll also mention that the you were talking about York Forward guidelines and things of that nature. We really use those in creation of the Reopening Dance in New York City digital toolkit. If you have not checked that out, that would be in the standard recommendations portion of that. But this is information that you don't get on paper, right? Like this is kind of the experience of having the inspector come in. So thank you, and thank you to the Dance Alliance for all of the work that you're doing for the community. Also, I just want to thank our ASL interpreters, Francesca Short and Carly James from LC Interpreting Services, as well as our closed captioner, Mary of the Scardy Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share. I hope I was able to pull information, and you know how to reach me. If there are any follow-ups, I'm happy to help. I want to get New York dancing. You got to get back to doing what we do best.